It's January 2011. Deftones released their sixth studio album, Diamond Eyes, 8 months ago and are touring Australia for the first time since 2007. Vocalist Chino sits down with journalist Andrew McMillan on the eve of the band's performance at the Big Day Out Festival to discuss music. But something's different. McMillan is complimentary. He confesses to Moreno that although an avid fan, he hadn't seen the band play live until last week at Gold Coast in Queensland. Despite this, he's confident enough to say that as a live act, Deftones is in their prime. Now, you may say to yourself that this is a bit presumptuous, if not overly flattering, if not downright blasphemous. Deftones had been doing this for years, so how could a guy who'd never seen them play live say something like this? Maybe he was comparing other bands that he'd seen before, bands that also had mileage in the industry. But what about the legendary 1998 Bizarre Festival or the famous 97 Cattle Club shows cementing Deftones as the heroes of Sacramento? What about the infamous shows like U-Fest in 96, Waldrock in 2001, or fucking hell, Big Day Out in 2003? Come on, man. I mean, I wasn't there either, but it's January 2011, and you're telling me the show you saw last week was them in their prime? Would you believe me if I told you that Chino agreed? I don't know about this week, maybe a month ago. We were a little more in our prime, said Moreno. We were at home for like a month, and that was the longest break we've had since we started touring on this record. That, accumulated with the heat and coming from winter into summertime, but I think musically, we're having a lot of fun. More fun than we've had in years. We're enjoying the shows. Of course, Chino's response could have been repaying the interviewer's kindness towards him with graciousness. That much is at least possible. But what is more important in his response is that they were having the most fun that they'd had in years. However, I would raise that they were also the healthiest they had been in years. Even if you ask attendees of recent shows in 2025, there are a number of people who say that Deftones still sounds awesome live, and they're still doing like 20 songs a set. A month before this interview, in December 2010, Deftones were touring Europe, and after watching the footage of that short stint, not only is the band quite in sync, but Chino had shed the Saturday night wrist weight and was far more mobile on stage. His voice had also regained its strength, which he attributed to him quitting smoking and a consistent workout regimen. I'm still a little self-conscious, said Chino. I mean, I work out and stuff, but I can always use a little more definition. That's a goal, a good goal. But what was the motivation to shed the pounds? Chino replied, just feeling better and looking better. I'd been depressed for a while, man. For a lot of reasons. It probably started 5 or 6 years ago from just going through divorces, taking so much time making records, and record company crap. Those were sort of dark days. It was a dark period in our career, but also my life. Just drugs and shit that was not getting me anywhere fast. Once I cut that stuff out and started to see things clearly, I started to realize that if I sweat a little bit every day, I sleep better. And if I sleep better, I wake up feeling happier. It's a vicious cycle. Pretty soon you look at yourself and you start recognizing yourself again. And that's what's different about this interview. It's really positive. And for a band that had been plagued with everything Chino outlined in his earlier quote and more, it was remarkable to read. Bassist Cheng was still in a coma, which caused Deftones to shelve Eros and hire quicksand bassist and longtime friend Sergio Vega to create Diamond Eyes, an album that critics considered really positive. But Deftones would continue their world tour until September 2011, and then they returned home with an insatiable appetite to start a brand new project. Deftones' creation of Koi No Yokan was something akin to a victory lap. After all the trauma, after all the bullshit, they were finally able to enjoy making records, for the most part. Everything wasn't perfect, but it was functional enough. After welcoming him to work on Diamond Eyes, Deftones opted to run it back with Nick Raskulinecz as producer. Koi No Yokan was tracked at Paramount Recording Studios, American Recording Studios, and the now defunct The Pass, all in Los Angeles. We started with brand new sounds from Fractal Audio, said Raskulinecz, which was a big sonic shift for the band. It's the first record where Stefan hadn't used the same amp and cab as on every record before. That alone lent itself to creating a fresh take on the music. Fractal opened up a whole new world of sonic elements that we didn't have on the last record, and it really took Stefan and Sergio out of the box. Frank Delgado chimed in and added, "It's funny, Stefan always wanted the biggest amps, but now he's into the Fractal. But even with no amps, it's still loud as hell. I don't make Tom Petty records," Raskulinecz continued. "There's never 4 or 5 dudes playing in the same room together. It's more of a systematic approach. We get a rough guide, then focus on each instrument for tuning and timing." Chino admitted to Billboard that Deftones had a reputation for dragging out the album making process. What was once a necessary latency for creative genius had been replaced with precise execution that could only be a result of knowing exactly where you wanted to go. But when speaking to Scottish magazine The Skinny, Chino broke down the rehearsal process and a recurring incident that had finally been addressed. We'd all come in around noon at a little rehearsal spot close to my house in North Hollywood, and we'd spend 5 or 6 hours with the door shut, coming up with ideas. Everybody just getting in the moment. We're at a point right now where everybody's inspired, you know? The songs really wrote themselves in a way. One of the problems we used to have was that nothing was ever finished. What it really was a lack of communication. Stefan would go into the studio and record a part, and I'd come in a week later and be like, "That's cool." But sometimes I'd change it a little bit, or I'd put a vocal over a certain part, or something wouldn't fit, and I'd move it around and he'd kind of get pissed, which I can totally understand. But when we actually write the songs in the same room, all 5 guys at the same time, we eliminate that from happening. Bassist Sergio Vega enjoyed more freedom to express himself on this album. "Everything was organic," said Vega to Electronic Musician. "We had fun playing around with gear and making different tones. Usually something will catch and we'll start jamming on it. We spent a lot of time refining a spark." When speaking to Illinois Entertainer, Chino spoke glowingly of Sergio. "He's awesome. I mean, his playing is one thing, it's great, and I think it pushes everybody to challenge themselves. But his person, I think when he came in at the time he did, obviously it was a really scary point for us in our career, where there was a lot of uncertainty whether we were going to carry on or not, or whatever. And if it wasn't for him, I don't think we would have." So while the band had long seen Sergio as a good friend and the fans were warming up to him more and more, many refused to rule out a return from Cheng. When speaking with Revolver in 2012, Chino himself had said, "It's not like I've completely settled into this, but I have acknowledged that it is what it is, like this is where we're at today, but it's not like there's been any kind of closure at all, because Chi is still alive and he's still fighting, so we can never completely relax into the way things are." People remained hopeful that Chi would fully regain consciousness and play again one day. Some were less optimistic. Even if he had regained consciousness, which he partially did, there was uncertainty about his motor skills, executive functioning, memory, his higher risk for respiratory infection, and speech going back to what it was. On June 16, 2012, it was reported on OneLoveForChi.com that he had to return to hospital to battle pneumonia. He was discharged from hospital only 2 days earlier. Thankfully, his stay wasn't too long, as he was free to return home on July 4. But an incredible thing happened a few months later. On the 10th of October 2012, Gabriel Cheng, Chi's son, joined Deftones on stage at the Warfield in San Francisco to play Root. And yes, he's a bassist, and a poet too. Rewinding back to July of 2012, Deftones played the legendary 500 capacity venue, the Troubadour, in Los Angeles, debuting 2 songs from the yet-to-be-named album. First was a song titled Roller Derby, which we now know as Poltergeist, and Rosemary, which we now know as Rosemary. Chino even took a few hits of some guy's joint. So despite his sobriety, he could still let loose and not take things too seriously, because now he trusted himself, and with that, self-control naturally became his default setting. And if we rewind a bit more to March 7, 2012, Chino remarried. Chino and Risa had been together for 2 years before hosting their wedding in Hawaii. It's as intimate of a decision that one could make, and maybe otherwise I would have skipped it, if it wasn't so strongly linked to the eventual title of the album the dude was working on. Koi No Yokan is a Japanese term that roughly translates to premonition of love, and lends itself to what the man's life had become, particularly when one considers the new nuptial bliss. When two people are attracted to each other, it could be merely sexual interest, but it could be something more. I think it's pretty, Chino confessed. I read it and it really caught my eye. The way it sounds is very poetic, just the words themselves. And I think that when you read the meaning, it's definitely something that speaks to a lot of people. People that have been lucky enough to experience something like that. Funnily enough, Stefan was the one that was pushing for it because he felt that it captured how the record feels to him. And I think that's great because usually he doesn't say anything about my lyrics. It made me feel really good that he read them and liked them enough to make a comment to me about it, and really felt a connection with it. Deftones had gained a reputation for having a sexual sound from the late 90s. Some have even gone as far as to call it sleazy. That was me, I did that. Their sound then morphed into something more melancholic during the dark days of divorce and drug addiction. And of course, what was the name of the album that they shelved? Eros. Romantic, however, is something that had become more of an apt adjective since Diamond Eyes. The story of Deftones has been a process, and the idea behind Koi No Yokan is similar because it is not love at first sight. It is a knowing that love is the perceived destination, but is not yet a reality. The journey had only just begun. And maybe you were among the lucky few who heard Poltergeist and Rosemary at the Troubadour and had a knowing that the upcoming album, whatever it was going to be called, would be pretty special. Maybe you had that feeling when you saw the album art, a photograph of the opposite house in Beijing. Maybe Chino and Risa had that feeling when they first saw each other. Nevertheless, it was a journey with an intuitive knowing of where it was going to go. And Koi No Yokan, the album, isn't that much different. I'll admit, when Swear City starts, I have literally no idea where the band is going. So I'll admit there was no premonition for me yet. But what there was intrigue. I tend to focus a lot on guitar, as I figure many of us do, but Steph's riffs were something I couldn't clock as stereotypically Deftones-esque or Deftones-ese. Yeah. With a sample size of 6 opening tracks prior to Swerve City, this was interesting and unique. It is the transition into the verse where the familiarity settles in, but Sergio is the shining light. The bass is absolutely effervescent. It bubbles you into a different realm, along with the rest of the band, into quite a contrast from the intro. It's a very good song. Romantic Dreams is an uncharacteristically on-the-nose title for a Deftones track. There's a transition from the verse to the pre-chorus that I remember felt clumsy when I first listened to this track years ago. But to be honest, many bands do similarly sharp contrasts. I just hadn't expected this because maybe Deftones wasn't a band that did it that much. But bands change because people change. It's natural for new features to emerge from any artist, and I think it explains why people started to distance themselves from the band. Even if it sounds good, it doesn't matter because it isn't familiar. After feeling through this track that had the working title Yard Sale, I grew to enjoy it a lot, but not only that, I actually appreciated the transitions because it allowed for the composition of the track to flow better. Had there been more seamless or even predictable transitions, I'm afraid this song would have become more of a cliche. And of course, The lyrics truly point us in the direction of a premonition of love, processing the constantly changing phases that release right on cue. It is no wonder one can know where things are heading, even as Deftones maybe keeps us guessing on what's coming next. And Leathers is a good example of this. Koi No Yokan is not a diamondized regen. Without the context of potential love, it sounds like a battle cry of bravery. There's that positivity again. But with the context of potential love, it feels more like a battle cry for honesty. Show your enemy what you look like. What's the enemy? It's deception. Deception for the sake of a cheap victory that will inevitably end in defeat. Now, if you told me Deftones would start a track with a bunch of clapping and that it would be one of my favorite tracks from them, I'd kill you. So I guess that's why they titled the track Poltergeist, because they knew that you'd just come back to haunt and taunt me. In fact, Chino sounds like whoever he's hanging out with is doing exactly that, but he loves it. This track is criminally underrated. Chino said the band doesn't write albums with any preconceived notions, and I believe him. They don't have to, because his emotions are on his sleeve, on the skin of his wrist even. I let you pretend, but you know the truth is that I love you to death. This time, there's a common thread. I have mixed feelings about Entombed, and no, it's not because I'm about to say it's bad. Quite the opposite. It's a guaranteed tearjerker, and one of the best things I've ever heard in my motherfucking life. The issue is that it's damn near mandatory to devote a song like this to someone that makes you feel the same way this song makes you feel. But if it doesn't go well, you might avoid the song because it's embedded to that person, and maybe you're entombed to that person. So what was once a scintillating song becomes something even more special because it was tied to someone you loved, but then became a fear when it all falls apart. Too personal? I apologize. As you may or may not know, Graphic Nature didn't impress me much as a standalone track, but in the context of the album, it's better appreciated. It's like a come down from the dizzying heights of Entombed, isn't it? Come to think of it, there was a point where I was listening to this often and then I just stopped. It's a song stuck in time for me because when I think about that time, I'm like, wow, this song is so chill yet urgent. I wouldn't say it took my knees out, but how the fuck did they do it? Colorways was the working title for what would eventually be titled Tempest, and it is one of the most straightforward tracks of the album. The element of surprise doesn't feature here nearly as much as the other tracks. And again, as you may or may not know, this track didn't impress me that much after several listens over the years, but let me be clear, it is in no way a bad track. Predictable, perhaps, but fans love it. I'll still listen to it every now and then, so if someone puts it on, I'ma rock to it. Gauze is pretty fun. Bombastic intro, sweet chorus, and again, the lyrics in the context of the premonition of love really underscore the sentiment of the album. Right before the outro, Chino sings, "I know what's in sight. I know your fate. I know I can't stop what you began." It is truly astounding that the album title came after the songs. But when speaking to Publication Mandatory, Chino said the band had about 40 ideas, which were made into 13 songs, but it was 11 that made the cut. Now, Rosemary, gorgeously relatable. The engine's drone is the only thing that is preventing complete silence, allowing minds to roam on what ifs and could be's. Fingers intertwine, allowing the couple to explore a new realm, one of union rather than separation. If the fans loved Tempest, they are obsessed with Rosemary, and it is easy to see why. And if Gauze was fun, Goon Squad is rapturous. Is this a song about a relationship too, or is it about Deftones? I carve my name across your tones when I'm set. I cut inside before the trends begin. I spend my time perfecting waves of contrast. cutting out all the same shit I've outgrown. I guess it could be about a goofy couple, sure. But who carves their name across your town, country, or continent when they're on tour? Who predicted the trends then jumped ship on a new flex that kept them ahead of their peers? Who have been the disciples of dynamism ever since they came out and kept reinventing themselves? Deftones, Deftones, Deftones. Oh, Deftones is the Goon Squad. Oh, okay. All right. I mean, it is natural to become pretty goofy when you love someone, of course, whether that's with a partner or with your best friends. But that line, cutting out all the shit I've outgrown, does it not dovetail perfectly into what happened to you? Chino was 39 when the song came out, so the line, 40 years in the wind I've played with you, for the rest of our days I'll remain, makes almost literal sense when you round up his age. But what is he referring to? Here's another line, this from the second verse. In a game of display, we break in two. We perform the ornate escape. And then the chorus, we're alive somewhere else, still asleep someplace new. We're ahead of our time, floating through. The various theories hold some weight, but they cannot explain the entirety of the track. Could it be about a romantic partner? At certain times, yes. Could it be about Chi? In certain lyrics, sure. But could it be about one's relationship with music itself? This to me is the closest one, but admittedly, it still falls short. It's one of those stream of consciousness songs that Chino writes, which is basically every song. But this melancholically sweet track is frustrating because it begs the mind to comprehend it. What happened to you is a sincere question, but I feel it is a question he is asking himself. And thankfully, I think Chino is happy with the answer. I can't speak for you, but when I first read the title, I immediately thought of it as a question of concern and perhaps even confrontation. But the tone is anything but. 9 albums deep as of this recording, this song is probably top 3 closing tracks for a Deftones album. Koi No Yokan itself is an excellent addition to the Deftones catalog and really makes me wonder when the band will work with Nick Raskulinecz again, because as much as we all love Terry Date, Raskulinecz was able to capture things other producers simply hadn't. When speaking to Chino and Abe about Koi No Yokan, Canadian online publication Upvenue referenced Romantic Dreams and asked the bandmates to take us back to one night where they felt that way. Abe, last night was fucking great. As you grow up, there are things you'll always hold on to. It could be anything at all. Your first this, your first that, anything. You remember smells. It's just a part of living life. It's really, really cool to have those moments. Chino. I was in 8th grade, and I went to my girlfriend's house at the time, and she lived on this lake. It was a Saturday night, and it was springtime, so it was warm outside. There's a certain song that reminds me of that. It's a song by The Cure called The Walk. The lyrics in the song sort of make you reflect on that. And I was listening to that song and I was doing that. I was walking around that lake with this girl, and I always think about those kinds of things. They paint really big pictures in my head. And I'm sure we can say the same for this album. I was listening to this album consistently for 2 years after it was released on November 12, 2012. In the 3rd year, and this would be the year prior to Gore's release, I was still rinsing my favorites regularly. A lot happened in those years. I even had a premonition of my own. But I'm glad Steph endorsed this title. We may never know the other ideas that were floating around for what to call this album, but from the music and life Deftones had begun to enjoy, Koi No Yokan as a title and a concept was an exceptional choice, and executed just as well. Thank you for watching.